Thank you all for coming to our workshop today. Today we're going to be discussing building and maintaining a professional online presence and why that matters. So we have Natalie Rose Pennington, Assistant Professor in Department of Communications, Steve Bickmore, Associate Professor, Department of Teaching and Learning, and Allison Saul, Analyst in the Vice Provost in Faculty Affairs Office. So they're going to talk about online presence and why it matters today. So I will turn it over to you all.
Are we going to go through the questions you all want us to cover? Or just talk openly? We can talk openly.
If you want to start, maybe just
Sure.
talk a little bit about how you came to be at this workshop or how this is all relevant.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
not sure I know
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well,
Go first. Yeah.
I'll start because I have to take issue with it's communication studies. We really hate when we're called communications. And I feel like part of owning my online presence is making sure that we're talked about in an appropriate way. So not to pick on you, Jennifer, but just communication. There's journalism and mass communication, which is communications typically, and then communication studies. And a lot of people don't know the difference between the two, right? If you're not in those areas, then you might not even be aware of the difference. And so for me, especially because people are less aware of communication studies, it's really taking the steps when I share about it online to make sure that people know who we are and what we do. And so that's something that we really try to push. And I say we collectively because you talk to any communication studies person and they're going to say that. And there's communication as well, but so difference between the two as part of that. But this is my first year at UNLV. I taught at Kansas State University for 3 years as an assistant professor. I study at the intersection of interpersonal communication and communication technology. So I know a thing or two about how we present ourselves online broadly. So can certainly speak to websites, which is something we can pull up and look at, but also our social media presence. And so I think that's something that's kind of interesting to think about as well as new scholars, the idea of like having a Twitter account and what that's like. So, hashtag academic Twitter is something that's certainly popular. And then also, what about having a public or private Instagram and things like that too.
Yeah. Well, I'm Steve Bickmore. I'm in the education department and primarily English education. And my field of study, my field of research is young adult literature. And I think I'm here because I have a web presence, I think. And about 4 years ago, this is my fourth year here. So 5 years ago, I started this when I was at Louisiana State. I was at Louisiana State for 7 years before I came here. And young adult literature is interesting because people like to read it, but nobody thinks it's serious, right? So I created a website called Dr. Bickmore's YA Wednesday, in which every Wednesday either I or a colleague in the field around the country, which could be a colleague, could easily be a teacher, graduate student, an undergraduate student, it could be another academic, will post something about, do we need to scoot over here? Post something about young adult literature. So it's pseudo-academic in that almost we can trace edited books, articles back to original blog posts, right? We just published last December 2 books on dealing with gun violence in schools. And that book came about specifically as the shooting here in Las Vegas, and then last year with the shooting in Florida. We said enough is enough, and we posted about it. We did a blog post, and then people said, well, why don't you do an edited book? And shortly we recruited academics who wanted to talk about how do you talk about gun violence in schools preemptively, if you're near a neighborhood where that happens. And so that's a core example of how a book came out of a blog post that I wrote because I was tired of writing about that. In some ways. And then we wrote one about, I had 2 edited books on grief and dying, which predated that. And a colleague wrote about 13 Reasons Why when it first hit as a Netflix show. And her opinion was people were misinterpreting the show and misinterpreting the buzz about it. And so she wrote a pretty sophisticated blog post, and we met at AERA a few months later and said, well, I'd be happy to do a book. And we ended up doing a book that talks about how teachers in English language arts classrooms can talk about societal loss and individual loss. We had so many we put out a call for chapters and had 80 responses, and we only needed 10 chapters. So we put it down to 2 books, and the publisher said, yeah, we separated one as individual loss and one as group loss. So you think about academic papers, to get a journal that has a 25% acceptance rate is quite good. To have an edited book with that is also, but I'm in a field where sometimes edited books don't matter. So I see the blog, and we can put it up here later, as a jumping off spot for, we sometimes review books, we review articles, people use my blog in their young adult lit classes around the country, and so it's pretty actively hit for an academic blog that's not making any money. I haven't tried to monetize it, right, and put ads on it, which is, I'm sure people are talking about all the time, right? But last year I think we had unique visits across the year, close to 200,000. And then individual web hits near 500,000 last year. So it's growing in terms of, if you want to have a national reputation, people know me in the field, right? Here, I'm some guy in the education department. Right?
I'm Allison Saul, and I am an analyst with the Office of Faculty Affairs. And the reason I'm here is to fill in with 4 panelists that was supposed to be here today. John Novak, who has put together a pretty useful library guide on maintaining an online presence, so we can share that during this time. But also, John and I have co-chaired a committee on improving the impact and visibility of scholarship. And so that's another reason why I'm here. So I'm here to share some of the resources that came out of that committee, some of the work that came out of that committee. I have a handout actually that we can go over, or you can just take it and use it as a resource. So that's why I'm here.
Well, my name's Guy Dawson, and I am the managing member of Classic Communications, a full-service public relations and advertising company. And I have been in business since 2008. And the reason why I am here is I have been working with interns at UNLV for about 6 or 7 years, mostly in the journalism department. And it's been an interesting experience working with so many different people, and I've had wonderful experiences with the students here at UNLV, and I really support the transition that a lot of you are making from being in school to, hey, now's the time, school's almost out, have to make a transition into what I want to do with my career. And so part of what I've kind of created within my company is almost it's an extension of the university, in that when people come and do internships with me, basically you're starting to really understand the practical application of how a public relations and marketing company works, rather than just immediately being thrust into your job where you're really expected to know a lot very quickly. I kind of, through the internships, I work with students to kind of help you bridge the gap, to start to take some of the theory that you learned in school related to what PR and marketing is all about, and give you some real life application in that. And then what's been happening through the last couple of years is I've been getting students who, after going through the internship, start to come on and work with me as subcontractors. So literally, I've worked with them in the transition from college to the real world of public relations and marketing, and then they start making money working for me, because I really like that, because I know what you know through the experience that we have in your internship. And I've always been really big about training and teaching, and that's why I enjoy working with UNLV so much with this kind of transition project that we've created at my company.
All right, so we can open it up for questions from you all. If anyone had any questions they wanted to start off with. Does anyone have any right away? If not, I have one or a couple, but I'm not sure who wants to grab this. Maybe you can all just pick. But what are some of the main differences between having a professional and a personal online presence? Or should you have different social media presences for a professional and personal, or how does one manage that?
I'm happy to take that one.
Yeah, I should probably be studied by the communication studies people,
Yes.
how I'm violating every protocol.
It's one of the things that I teach in my classes. I teach a class called Online Relationships, and certainly one of the things that we spend some time on are questions of impression management, online identity management broadly. And for myself, I think what I try to practice is what's called the lowest common denominator approach. So think about the person in your personal network or professional network that you would share the least with, and use that as your baseline for sharing online across the board, right? So I don't know that I necessarily have any sort of super private sharing online, period, and I think that that's a smart strategy, right? Things have a degree of permanence, even if you think they don't online. The replicability of materials, even if you think that they don't have it, they do. And so keep that in mind when you share, even if you think it's a private network, if it's closed, somebody could still screenshot something, right? So be smart about your private sharing and your professional networks, and keep that in mind. And so for me, it's everything kind of has a potential professional element, but also, I love my pets, and so that's something that is across all my things on my website. I've got pictures of my 2 cats and dog, and that's a big part of my Instagram as well. But those things are public, and so if people want to see my pets, that's fine. I share them on my first day of class when I teach too. It makes me more human, right? And so it's kind of the balance between the two. I don't think that that's something that's going to hurt me, right? But balancing it, I think, is smart.
Yeah, it's something I worried about from the very beginning, because I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent. I had Facebook before I decided to do blog stuff, and so my Facebook account, initially I didn't think I needed one, but if you have a blog, people need to know about it. And one of the things you do is my kid said, "Dad, you need a Twitter account." Okay, what does that mean? So I had to get a Twitter account, and they still tell me I should be on Instagram, but I don't do it well, right? So I don't do that. And then I soon learned that, so my blog is called Dr. Bickmore's Why Wednesdays. I said I needed a Facebook page that was that. So I'm very conservative about what I post, even family, because it mainly uses a way in which I see what my kids and grandkids and connected community. I mean, I've taught high school for 25 years. Facebook's been wonderful to connect with old students and people who now are teachers themselves, and in some cases, academics. So anything that's professional, I post first through Dr. Bickmore's Why Wednesday. I may share it to my timeline and to other professional groups. There's Why Literature, there's English Education, there's a whole bunch of groups that are associated with the study of young adult literature that I may share with. So I think when I post, I may share it 15 times to those groups. But it's pretty clear it's coming from the academic guy and not Steve Bickmore, right? They'll look at that. And I'm not sure I've done any of that well. I've done that kind of, the commitment I had is I'm going to do it once a week and see where that goes and see if we have it. Like the first year I wrote them all. The second year I wrote about 75%. The next year I wrote 50. I had somebody every other. This year I've written about 35%. The goal was for me never to write, right? But I don't know that will happen, right, to do that. But you have to get the word out, and people have to be engaged in it. But there's a really fine line, I think, about your academic self and your public self.
And I think for those of us and those of you in the room, you may be thinking about going on the job market. And so that's going to be really important to maintain your professional versus personal, because you want all that professional stuff out there because you want people to see it. You want to be recruited. You want people to know what you're up to. You may want to have a separate, maybe even a separate account for the personal stuff until you're off the job market, maybe. But that might be a tip for you, for those of you who are on the market.
Yeah, I always say when I'm working with clients in marketing and PR is that if you don't want people to know about it, don't post it. I mean, that's just a hard and fast rule. As it was mentioned before, is once it goes out there and it's in the universe, you don't know where it's going to be picked up. And we live in this world where our privacy is not what it used to be with the internet, and people research you. They really do. I mean, they look as all of us do, right? We do lots of research about entities and people, and so that's why it's really important, I think, that you definitely monitor what you're posting. I say there is a place for the personal side because it is important. People want to know what you are as a human being and things about your kids, right? Some of your posts, if it's your family, your mother, your kids, or your dogs, people love that. I mean, you get a lot of likes behind things like that. So I think it is important that you show some presence, but definitely be smart about the way that you present yourself online.
That's a question.
Question from the audience, yeah.
Piggybacking off that question, do you think that not having an online presence can affect your ability to get a job? And what do you think about posting political things on your social media? So kind of two questions, sorry.
Anybody want to take that? I mean,
I stay away from politics.
yeah.
I wouldn't post anything about politics if you're, yeah.
But I do think that there should be some online presence, especially if you're on the job market, because wherever you're going, they're gonna want to see how you promote yourself and how you might then promote them as an employee of that institution. So we have a lot of social influencers on campus that are faculty members, and they do a really great job. And it not only highlights them, but it highlights the institution, and so that's important.
There are such varying degrees of what an online presence can be. So, just hearing Steve talk about his very, very active blogging compared to my website, which is fairly static, right? So I'm very traditional in when you open the page, it's got a short about me with a couple pictures of pets, husband and me. And then it's got a tab for my research, a tab for about the classes I teach, and a tab with professional development resources for my undergrad and grad students. And it's just and I try to go in and update it every couple of months with new resources for students and if I have new publications, but otherwise it's static. And so for me, that's a nice, easy, when I went on the market, that was not too complicated for me to set up. WordPress is great. Reclaimed hosting, which UNLV uses, fantastic, very easy to use. Political it depends. If you're going for a political job, they probably want to see you posting about political issues to show that you have that presence and conversation.
That's a good point.
But if it's not a politically oriented job, then you're going to run the risk of where that could, push back against you and cost you the job, especially if your positions are opposite of the person who's hiring you. And that's just kind of the cold hard facts, right?
Yeah, I think it's a fine dance. So, because when we talk about web presence, it's all connected. You can't say I only have a faculty web page and I have a blog, and it's all, they're going to find you, right, if you look that. So my policy is I don't make a specific comment about political people, but I will talk about issues. I'm not going to talk about gun violence. I'm going to talk about it if I want to, right? But I may not post on Facebook and say, oh, I hate gun violence. What I'll do is make a formal, I did one called Say His Name after the Orlando shooting. I mean, there have just been too many, in which I talked about young adult resources and young adult novels that deal with the issue. And then I linked to Jimmy Fallon's comment about it. And I linked to the Say His Name video, and she just ran out of my mind, who had the rap song, Say His Name. It'll come to me. But I linked to that video, right? Because I had something intentional to say, that it's important for us to remember not the perpetrator, but the names of victims, right? And it's linked to the Black Lives Matter movement and other things. So that's highly political, but I would say it's connected more to a topic than any one person who may be pontificating about that. And I went out of my way not to attack people, but to say, this is how I think that issue should be approached. And so that's a difficult thing to do. And then some people say, well, is that even academic?
It's journalistic.
Right? Yeah, is it?
To me, that's journalism.
Right, see, and so while I would spend time, I'm probably spending 10 hours a week doing the blog, which I'm supposed to be working 40 hours a week, right, for my job here. So how much of that is really my academic work? How much of that gives me academic notoriety, makes me a national figure? Because UNLV wants professors that have people who have a national prominence in their field, right? So does it count that I have that readership versus that. So, and then I think you all, if you're going to be in the academic world at all, you need to worry about Google Scholar, ResearchGate, all the different ways in which you are cataloged and classified, right, as an academic. And I think those intertwine in difficult ways. Right?
You said a really important thing that I wanted to jump on before I forget, which is just that if you have never Googled yourself, Google yourself, because the idea of, do I have to have a web presence? Everybody has a web presence in some capacity, whether you realize it or not. And so just kind of being aware of what that presence looks like to the average person who's researching you is, keep that in mind.
Yeah, and go across different search engines
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
what you find in Google may not be what
Yeah.
you find in
Yeah.
a different search engine.
And a public computer versus private, because
Yeah,
your
yeah.
own computer will have
Just be your own
tailored
Yeah, be your own
messages to you.
Yeah.
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 And one of the challenges people have sometimes is that they want to get rid of things that come up in the search engines. And, how do you do that? I don't really know how to get rid of something that shows up in a search engine, but I agree, the awareness of what's out there, I think, is most important.
I do have one question, but jumping off the search engine thing, I believe there are companies now that you can pay and they'll delete your info off databases, but it only deletes them off so many of the total databases there are. So even if you pay them, it'll still have the possibility of people finding your info if they try hard enough. I heard that a few years ago, but
I think it's probably still true.
yeah. But my question is, when you're building a personal or kind of trying to get a following presence online, I know consistency or number of posts kind of matter. Is it the same thing for building a professional presence? And if so, how would you recommend making it so that you can post consistently?
Well, so with Twitter, for example, you can schedule posts ahead of time. So if you're concerned about being consistent with posting and you just don't have the time every single day to sit down and think that through, the idea of okay, if I spend 10 hours every week on the blog, if you think about, not 10 hours on tweets, but if you take 1 hour every Friday morning to sit down and think about what your tweets for the next week are going to be, you could get those scheduled out for the next week so that it ensures you tweet regularly, even if you're not actually logging into Twitter every day. And so that helps ensure that presence. Also just regularly following and engaging with other people. So, I try to follow as many academics as possible, paying attention to when Twitter makes recommendations to me about people I should be following. If someone new follows you, following them back, expanding the network in that capacity, I think makes a lot of sense. And I say Twitter just because in my mind, that's the most academically oriented of the social networking sites. In some, we haven't talked about LinkedIn at all, but certainly in some disciplines, professions, LinkedIn is really big, not comm studies, so I can't speak to that as much as an academic. I could speak to it from my research perspective, but not really as popular.
And there's a lot of software or programs or websites that will help track when people look at your research. So for example, academia.edu, if you create a profile there, it'll say someone saw your paper or someone looked at your page. And so there's a lot of different types of those sorts of metrics out there. And it may be specific to your field. Academia.edu may not be the go-to for your discipline, but there are lots of different avenues out there to help you keep track of who's seeing your stuff in those things.
I know you mentioned that Twitter you can schedule posts in advance. Someone recently told me there's an app or a website called Hootsuite where you can also do that for other social media.
Yeah, Hootsuite is great.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's a great platform.
Yep. Facebook's got it embedded as well. So if you've got a Facebook page for your blog, then it's already embedded in, and it's got a lot of those metrics set up as well, where you can kind of see engagement from your users. And some posts are doing better than others.
Yeah, and that's very interesting too, because if you're going to be an academic, if you're going to the business world, you may feel free to monetize those things right away. If you're doing it as an academic, it's tricky because almost all these social media things want to monetize what you're doing for their own benefit, right? If they want to throw ads into people who are looking at your feed, they're going to feel free to do that, right? So, I get reports on, this is a really active posts. And I think, I tend to believe that hesitantly, right? It's interesting to see, like, so I'm in education, right? So kids now that we're training to be teachers, if they teach 40 years or 30 years, so let's say they teach 30 years, that means they're done teaching in 2050 or 2060. They'll teach kids who, if they teach kids who are born in 2040, let's say you were a senior when you're 2060, so they're going to go to the next century. I'm teaching kids who will teach kids who will influence the next century. To say that we're preparing for the 21st century and we need to be online is ludicrous, because we're already teaching for the 22nd century. We're already influencing people for that, and we collectively, as educators, haven't thought about that very radically, right? To think about that we're already touching, in some ways, the next century. To assume that we won't make the same kind of quantum leaps in our tools of communication, I think is radically naive, right? So if you're going out and somebody said, well, should I have an academic presence? I think you have to. I think we're evaluating tenure. I think we're evaluating scholarly productivity in really naive kind of ways that are really traditional, that hark back to a century ago, when I know, for example, that some blog posts have been read thousands of times. If you have one that we had, somebody posted last week, and she had 4,000 views of that page, right, over the course of 3 or 4 days. My highest cited article only has 150 citations. Well, let's say it's been read 7 times for every time it was cited. So that article is now 10 years old and maybe it's been read by 1,000 people, maybe, right? But you do a blog post that's read 3,000 times in a week and archived, and then people are more like, they shouldn't, but people are more likely to read something I wrote in a young adult literature class that I wrote as a blog post than they are to read one of my articles that I published in the English Journal or the Signal Review, which is a young adult journal, or the Allen Review. And I've published in all those avenues, but I'm not sure that those are influencing in the way that the blog is influencing.
Well,
right?
and part of that probably speaks to open access.
Absolutely, right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so something to think about.
So professionally, someone had talked about posting, and for me, it's LinkedIn all the way. If you're looking for a job, one of the things that I would encourage you to do is make sure that you get your LinkedIn profiles, keep them up to date, up to speed. My company, we actually do workshops where we work with people on how to create great LinkedIn profile pages that are more engaging to people. And then the crossover on the academic side is that you can post articles on LinkedIn, which is actually a really effective way to get connections on the search engines. Is they give you that place where you can post articles there, and there's algorithms that social media create, and one of the best ways to really maximize LinkedIn is to use the article section. So that's purely on the academic side, but on the professional side, I would say pay attention a lot to LinkedIn and join groups. There are some excellent groups on LinkedIn that you can be a part of, and you can meet people and make a lot of connections that way.
Okay, so we already talked about some of the profiles, but what are some specific websites or, platforms, what are some specific websites or platforms that you all would suggest to build up your online profile? So you mentioned some good ones already, like LinkedIn, obviously.
Well, I made the comment, I said I use, so to host my website, I use Reclaim Hosting, which is actually the same thing UNLV uses for its, I don't know if students can use it too, but I know that it's for faculty and staff, which I thought was cool because I'd had it before I came here. But it's for academic presence, so their whole goal is that it's actually kind of ownership around faculty, which is nice. And then I just used WordPress, I can't even talk, to build my site. So we'll just go ahead and finally go to one of our pages. We can start with mine and then work our way down to the different things. So this is my website. built in WordPress, so there's a template, and then the pictures from Pixabay, which is just Creative Commons images that you can use for free, so keeping in mind Creative Commons. But like I said, so on the main page you can get the About Me, you can scroll to see my pets, I said, so my cats and my dog, who's adorable. Yeah, so and learning some things about me. What do I like about Vegas? What do I do in my free time? So kind of making me a person. But then you can look and see what research I'm working on. All right, so do we really need 1,000+ Facebook friends? Political interpersonal conflict, work-life balance. If you want to know more, maybe you want to look at my CV. We talked about the idea. I think we mentioned Google Scholar earlier, so I linked to my Google Scholar profile, which is certainly helpful. So for those who are interested in that kind of thing, that has all of that. So my sites and kind of keep track of research and teaching interests. You can get classes I teach or have taught. And then I mentioned this is one of the things that not a bunch of academics do, but because I'm also going to be our incoming undergraduate student coordinator for our department, and I just also advise grad students, so I think it's important. I include tabs that have links for things like why is communication studies important, because so many people mix up comm studies versus communications and the difference between the two. Basic UNLV information, tips and tricks, funding opportunities, kind of big things like that. And then also for grad students, so hey, this could apply to any of you for some of these things, right? So like the most important thing, graduate student happiness and well-being report, right? Something to keep in mind and read. And then some UNLV information, teaching things, research things as well. For those going on the job market, if you've never read Stern Works and you're interested in like academic positions, highly recommend it. So even though I'm in comm studies, these things can apply in other areas. And so I kind of just try to be like a general professional development stuff, but also share about my research as a broad thing. And so that's sort of my approach, but WordPress made this super duper easy to build. It's really easy for me to maintain, very low effort. Like I said, I probably go in every couple of months, maybe even like I'd say quarterly, and make some adjustments as needed. And it's really more of a, if I have a new research article or I've made, and by the way, the other thing that's nice is, so the CV, that's the last thing I'll say, the CV is linked through my Dropbox, so all I have to do is update it on my other end, and it'll always update my CV. So I don't have to actually come here and like put a new file in. So that makes that in. But because I want to like add a new journal article, right? So whenever I needed to put this article in, I had to come and write it in. So that's something to think about. But it's otherwise pretty easy.
You just gave me more things to do. So which is part of that. Now the question I have for you: do you own your domain name?
Yes.
And see,
$30.
Yeah. See, and I ended up owning. I had to own more because I wanted things that were exclusive, and that's again. So you're doing that. So I bought it for 5 years. I just re-upped them a year or so ago, and and if I'm really doing it academic, shouldn't I argue that my department should pay for that? Yeah. But if I do I own it or does my department own it, right? So is it my intellectual property or the university's intellectual property? And all those things, when you're an academic, those play out in ways that we haven't defined well yet, right? And it's the same reason why every university has research centers associated with it. Well, that's because somebody who's doing cancer research doesn't necessarily want the university to own all their patents and everything. They want a percentage might go to the university. So rather than do it all within their office or lab on the university, they subcontract themselves to research centers. Well, I think we're getting to the point where if we're going to do academic kind of stuff in a different sphere, what does that look like, right? And like I say, we're really in new territory that hasn't been defined very well. Right? And in business, he's looking at, what? You can't own your own stuff?
Yeah, because I'm always thinking I'm just going to get my own.
Yeah, that's right.
When you're talking about the domain, I mean, my mind just says, I remember when I first got my company started and I got with a web designer and I didn't know anything about domains at that time. So the web designer goes out, buys my domain because I didn't know any better, built the website, did a crappy job with the website. And I said, okay, I want to have someone else build my website. I don't like what you're doing. So the guy says, all right, I want $500 for the domain that he ripped off from me, the .com from my company. So these are some of the things that happen out there. And
Yeah.
World of business, and you just have to. So I bought the .net, and I'm waiting for the time when he drops the .com, and I can go back and buy it
Yeah.
for myself. But you have to be aware of things like that. Is that there are a lot of different scenarios that can play out. I think websites are great. I mean, for a person to have a website is something that makes you. It's great for the marketing of your personal brand. Actually having your own website, buying your domain, renting it, that's basically what you do is you rent
Right.
your domain. But going and getting that and having your own website is very impressive. Something that I would encourage people to do. I think it's the best way to present yourself. Where you also have more of the management of it, because it's your website, you're in control of it.
Yeah, let me show you
Yeah,
mine,
so
because
let's
mine
look
is
yours.
radically different than hers, because I had different goals initially, right? So,
It's not coming up.
not,
Sorry, not, oh, no, it started and then it just,
are we not in it?
it did something weird. Let's try again.
Okay,
Okay, now it's,
let's see if we can get it,
there it
Doctor.
goes.
Did it show up
Yep.
yet? I'm yeah,
Alright.
really, right there.
Okay.
We got it? Okay.
Yeah.
So you can see that the one that posted
Today.
this Friday was Joe posted this, and she's a young adult writer who was here at UNLV last year, and then she's writing about. So I give an introduction about her 2 books, and then she runs in the Salt Lake City area a young adult book teen author book camp. They had 1,000 people a couple of weeks ago. So they had some young adult authors, and then these teens, 1,000 of them, pay her to come do a workshop today. So she wrote about that, and if you scroll down, there's some pictures about it, and and so she talks about it, and this is a way in which those, and then I end it. Right now, we're going to have a summit on young adult literature here, so I end it with. Remember, we're doing this here. Come to UNLV. If you link to there, it goes there. It goes to an the summit. So, and then I continue to run this. I think I have mine open so that they run for the month. I haven't. I'm learning to start truncating them after a while so that more will be easier. And that's the kind of thing that, if I were a professional blogger, I'd have already known about all that stuff. But truncating those kinds of things so that they read the first 2 paragraphs was like news to me 6 months ago, right? Because I don't think about it. If you go to the top, I'm running a survey with a colleague, and so there's a link to that survey, which is on, take the questionnaire. If you go down here on the other side, I scroll through here, other things about me, and then scroll through the edited books that I've done, and then you see the archive, right? So it's kind of really focused on just young adult literature, less about me. If you go to the top again, one of the things I've added is there's an archive of the contributors. So if you click on that real quick and scroll down, you can see all the other people from the first time who began to contribute, right? And if you scroll down to the current one, you see every year there's more and more academics who are contributing. And they link to this. They link to this on their profiles and their pages, and some are pretty reoccurring. Some I beg to do it more often, and some I think, no, we've done enough of you this year, right? Not that it's not good, but I don't want it to be so-and-so's blog. So if you go back up here to Weekend Picks, this was a feature that we started doing. And again, like, scroll to this picture here. That's actually my granddaughter. But it's very conscious not to show her face, right? It was an article that a picture that my daughter sent me, and, catches Gwen reading at night. And so, but then, so every Friday, if you'll scroll down here, we have a weekend pick. And today's weekend pick was by Stephanie Tulliver, who's one of the people who's coming to the conference and presenting. She's a doc student at University of Georgia. And I met her online because she was posting really cool stuff about diverse characters. And so I kind of ran into her at a conference. We met, and I said, would you write for me? And she wrote a blog about, remember, A Wrinkle in Time. So A Wrinkle in Time uses a diverse character. The book is not written necessarily that way, but it's interpreted that way. And so she wrote a really dynamic review of the movie and the book and how it's answering the call for diverse characters. So Stephanie's there. And so what I've done with Weekend Picks is 1 month I pick, 1 week somebody else picks. And so January was picked by somebody who's going to be here. March was picked by somebody who's going to be here. In February, I co-picked with African American scholars because it was Black History Month. So I went and found African American scholars who also picked books with me, right? So it's doing what I think are academic things, but it's also doing the things I want teachers to do, right? I want my classroom teachers to talk about diverse books. I want them to think about the way they can include their students. If we were to scroll down here to January's, Sarah Donovan picked all her books with her 7th grade students. And she got permission in January to, yeah, this is coming. She got permission from the parents to have all of her kids highlighted. And scroll down, some of them do videos and do that. So the book was not picked by Sarah, it was picked by what Sarah's students are doing, right? And so when I say that it's, so I want teachers doing this. You know, I want teachers thinking about how are my students actively involved in my classroom. So I should have links to where I'm doing better things than I'm doing, but it was never the initial goal, right? If you show how bad it is, see where it says more? There's other things. I linked to my YA course that I taught in 17, which was the last time I taught it. I have a link to the National Book Award for Young Peoples. I have last year's summit summary there. I'm interested in YA and music, so I have a stub that started. But most of this is just hit or miss, right? So my academic stuff is weak here, right? And I still use my UNLV thing, and I need to link better here. But you can see it depends on what's your initial purpose, what are you trying to achieve, who do you think is going to see it, how stupid are you when you start, right? And freely admit, stupid as a sack of rocks when I started doing this, right?
Well, I think it's about intended audience.
Yeah,
Because at the start, I was so impressed. You talked about how intensely your blog has created opportunities for edited books, connecting with others. I think it's so cool you're getting these people involved. So it made me think about the question earlier about building followings. You know, don't ever get spending a ton of time like planning out tweets and stuff academically unless your goal is to be really actively using Twitter or your blog or Facebook for a very specific type of purpose to gain those followers, right? Like, so who is your audience and why? Is really to ask yourself there. And so if my goal to get Twitter followers is because I need like co-authors for an edited book, then maybe I'm tweeting and planning those tweets and being consistent for that reason. But if having 500, 1,000 Twitter followers doesn't do anything for me, then, you know, ask yourself what's the purpose? And so
Yeah.
kind
It's
of
like what we try to do when I'll also, when this posts, you know, when I post a new one, I tweet it also, but I also try to include the tweet of the author we're highlighting. So Stephanie tweets L.L. McKinney's book. Well, we went and found her Twitter feed and we leaked. And occasionally, a lot of the followers are either academics or authors. Oh, you tweet, we think every author is a millionaire. They're not. They're struggling day-to-day people who are trying to hope somebody reads their book, right? So if you tweet a book by L.L. McKinney, she might tweet it back and thank you and get to her followers. And that's double-purposed. I want to honor the work of the person, but I want that person's followers also to realize that maybe I'm doing other stuff with diverse books in different kinds of context, right? So it's, again, what's your purpose is an underlying question all the time. Clearly mine hasn't been to make myself a full professor, right? I haven't done that. But I'm interested in my co-author. Michelle Falter was a second-year associate when I said, let's write the book on grief and dying from your 13 Reasons Why. You know, both my co-editors for the gun book are assistant professors who I feel like it's better for me, as ancient as I am, to nurture new scholars into the field than worry. You know, I had colleagues tell me directly, well, you should do more empirical studies. And I said, to what end, right? What does that mean? Because I think if my goal is to have things change in classrooms, if I go to Las Vegas High School and 90% of the kids are Hispanic, Latinx, or African American, and they're still reading books by white authors, then that's wrong, in my opinion. It's not that they shouldn't have some white authors, but where are the books where the characters look like them, right? And so that's part of my academic goal, to get others thinking about that, moving that direction. And so if I never get tenure, or I got tenure, but if I never get to be a full professor, la-di-da, you know. But I think I'm doing enough academic work that that'll go, right? I had the National Book Award. We had a really strong article surveying the first 20 years of the National Book Award and how racist it was, essentially, was the message. We didn't say, how racist are you, right? But we just showed kind of the statistics. And the last 3 years, we finished it 2 years ago, the last 2 years have been much better. In fact, 2 years ago, every author was a woman, and that had never happened before, of the 5 finalists. And 3 of those represented diverse populations. And last year, the 5 finalists represented diverse populations as well. And when you think in the first 20 years, there was 1 Latino out of 100 finalists. There were only 12 African American, and 9 of those were the same 3 people. So it's like tokenism writ large, right? Oh, let's recommend a book by Walter Dean Myers again. They recycle them. But no winners until the 19th year. We didn't have an African American winner for that. So we were documenting that. So I am doing empirical work, but I care less about the empirical work than I care about the day-to-day classroom of what teachers might do in the future.
So,
Library guy?
yeah, let's go to the library.
Yeah, here's that. Or you
So,
wanna-
just
Yeah.
do it.
It's hard to do it over your shoulder, I found.
Yeah. So if you just search, go to the search.
Yep, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. That first one right there. So John has put together this website that you might find useful. It's an internal resource, and each of these red tabs is a separate page. So it's going to give you a little bit. This right here, if you'll scroll down, is an infographic that I have a copy of today that you can use, and it just summarizes some of the ways that you can increase the visibility and impact of your research. So not necessarily yourself, but your research. But it can all go together, as we've seen with those 2 websites that we already looked at. But this is going to give you some of those websites that we use. ORCID ID, if you don't already have one of those, that's really important, and that's what we prefer you to use. Here's some tips for managing your online presence. Right, we want you to use it regularly. We want there to be some professional element to that. You can create Google alerts for yourself so that you can see, right, where you are, what's happening with you and your research. There's a lot of campus resources available. If you're not already involved, please do that. And then here are some social media just suggestions. These are the ones that UNLV uses. UNLV has a presence on all of these social networks. So if you create that, then you can cross-list and you can create networks and bring visibility to UNLV as well. And just a tip, beware, right? We've already talked about this. Some of the data that you have might be owned by the company that you are dealing with. So you want to be careful. With ORCID ID, you actually, that's an independent researcher ID, but something like, I don't know, ResearchGate, right? They're gonna, you could put an article on there, they're gonna own that. They're gonna do what they want with that. So you should be aware of that whenever you engage in that. But if you'll go up just a bit, again, everything on the side here you can get more information about. And so if you haven't already seen this website, I would encourage you to use it. Again, I have a handout that you can pick up before you leave that just is this right here that will summarize just briefly what that's about and how to maybe increase that visibility impact of your research. So,
Allison, how do we get that? Or go to the main...
yeah, so it's on the library page. I have the website listed on the handout, but you could just search online reputation management.
Yeah, guides.library.unlv/reputation management.
Yeah. So some of you may find that helpful, but
No, this is the kind of thing I wish somebody would have told me, when I'm an assistant professor at LSU, saying, oh, you wanted... And part of it was advertising at Summit we were having and doing that kind of business. And so we've used it for that kind of outreach. But these tools are available, and I would say probably, 90% of the faculty don't don't know how to use this or that it's even here.
Yeah, so
Right?
this is hot off the
Right,
press.
right.
So we're going to be introducing it. We have a new faculty orientation coming up in August, and we're actually going to roll this out. Then we're going to have a presentation about
Great.
that, so that the new incoming faculty see it, and then we'll
And
spread the word after that. So
No,
yeah.
I'm thrilled.
Good.
I don't care what you guys have learned at all. It's really, I've learned from all three of these people what I'm going to do,
You know,
absolute selfishness,
I was
right?
gonna say, fun fact, Pew Internet just came out with like full demographics of the most widely used social media across like all internet users, and number one is YouTube. So like
Yeah.
as an academic, I think it'd be interesting to think about, because that one's really not used nearly as much.
No,
So
no,
like
no.
we haven't even mentioned that yet
Yeah.
today. So when I
Yeah.
saw that on there, it made me think, I
Yeah.
certainly don't use it, but
And Snapchat is on there.
Yeah.
We have I don't know how you would use.
yeah, demographically is like a good way to reach younger.
Younger,
You know,
yeah.
if you look at the percents, that's your 18 to
Yeah.
32. But if you're really trying to reach like, community engagement with your scholarship, YouTube is the like from 65 plus down to 18. It was the highest, like 90% for
Yeah.
the youngest age group. That's their number one.
Yeah, so you create
Yeah.
the YouTube. There were YouTube
Yeah.
videos on your
Yeah, exactly.
website.
Yep.
Then you can cross-list it onto
Yep.
your professional,
Yep.
and
Yep.
all of that stuff just gets
Yeah.
captured and.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's. I mean, I have a niece who's like one of these makes money off a website.
Yeah.
She and her partner, and they met in college, and they've been doing this, and they make about $50,000 each doing this, right? And they do like recipes, and she looks at me, and I say, "Help me, Jessica," and she goes, "I don't have time to help you. I mean, this is 40 hours a week with little kids and everything else." And my brother helps people in business get better web presence, and he says, "Why don't you do your weekend picks on YouTube?" And I thought, I should, right? But that's thinking about, do I need to get a camera? Do I need to get a light? And do I need to sit and do 12 weekend picks all in a row so they're ready to go? And, because it's what, a minute to have that YouTube presence? And that's on the bucket list. But again, is that my job? Is that my job, or is that my hobby? Or can it be my job? Or do I spend time doing it
Does
and
it
not
give you
get
tenure?
credit? Yeah, does it give me, well, I got tenure, so I'm not worried about that, right? But does it give me cachet? And so there's mixed messages. We want you to have a national presence. Well, what does that mean, right? Does it mean, like we talked about in Google Scholar, you should all understand Google Scholar too, because what your H factor is or your I-10 factor is important. And I have a respectable factor. I'm 7 and 7, which is respectable for an early career associate professor. But it's not rock star full professor. I think my major professor at Georgia has an age factor of like 30. But he's been an academic for 25 years, and it's different. But I think the average associate is somewhere between an age factor of 5 and 7 when they go up. But there's people who don't even create those. They haven't even created their Google Scholar presence, and nor do we use it as a benchmark for should you get tenure, right? Necessarily. But that's coming. Remember I said we're teaching kids for the 22nd century? We're already going to influence that. And I think, people in communication studies are probably talking about that, or in communications as well, right? What are we doing? You've got to have some kind of presence and mark yourself. I think if you don't, you're wrong. Right?
So that kind of actually ties into another question that I had. So what are some tips that you all have for making your page, once you have a website or page, stand out from all of these other pages? So if now the thing is everybody has a website, how do you get yours to kind of stand out or grab that attention?
Don't know.
Definitely you have to have video. I would say any website at this stage, all of your social media presence should have a video component. Because people don't, and I know I'm at college, so I shouldn't be saying this, but people don't read a lot
Yeah.
nowadays. And videos are how people learn things, and we share a lot of information that way. And I would highly recommend that you take advantage of the video component of every social media platform as well as your website. and even vlogs.
Yeah.
So rather than writing physical blogs, you can actually, for the people who don't even take the time to read a great blog, you can still communicate with them by just creating a vlog that basically says what the written blog would say.
That's what I say about using YouTube when we know it has such a large following, and do a video blog instead. So there's the potential there. There's a lot of work though, which is also to what Steve pointed to. Do it and do it well, and build a following takes a lot of time. You know your audience. I mean, I think that's just like, that's one thing that I say today you take away with is know what your goal is, know who you want your audience to be, and tailor your message accordingly. If it's to get a job, then I think that something similar to what my site is probably is sufficient. But if it's to build those connections to be able to write a book or collaborate, then perhaps something similar to what Steve's doing is more up your alley. And two very drastically different faculty approaches. Been coincidental because neither of us knew what the other one was doing when we signed up for this, and so works well as kind of two ends of the spectrum there.
No, and I think I need, in reality, more of hers as it's evolved, because I had a different goal. But now, why can't I mesh, have a tab that meshes that and do that? And again, it's just time, I have a book chapter due the 21st, so, it's time. You have finals, we have book chapters.
Do you have a question?
Not a question, just like kind of building off what was already said. So like you mentioned how YouTube obviously need to find more ways to use that, and you mentioned how you can use vlogs more. I guess for like a blog like yours, you could just have like the blog where you just read the blog. That way it makes it more accessible to people who either have like learning disabilities and struggle with like long intensive readings, or people that might have some like visual impairments as well. So that could be one way to kind of bridge the gap.
Absolutely, and that's on the bucket list. Like, we're having a summit here. One of the goals is maybe to ask everybody who's here to pick their favorite book, video it, and then archive it so that we can be throwing 1-minute videos for the weekend picks for next year. And we got teachers here, we're going to have academics, we're going to have authors. If I could convince a large variety of them to go to our library and pick a book, right, and book talk it, you can archive it. But again, it's work, right? But I'm well aware that that would enhance everything that's going on. If I had a YouTube channel that was Dr. Bickmore's YA Wednesday or Dr. Bickmore's Weekend Picks, whatever, right? That would enhance all of that, right? But it's work, right?
Yeah.
We need a marketing firm to do it pro bono for me, right? So that they can do that, right?
A quick, easy video component for the approach with my site for like an adjustment is like a next step, so maybe something I'll do over the summer, is that for my current research, and I actually like so I have a widget is the term, that's an add-on for mine that sort of tells me the readability of my site, and this is actually the one where it hits me and tells me that the readability of my site is not so great, because my terms could be a little bit better because they're geared towards a particular audience, which is that I expect other academics are kind of reading about what my research is, and I use particular terms to refer to what I'm studying. And so maybe instead of having the block of text here for the 3 projects I'm working on, I could embed a short Panopto clip. So we have Panopto here at UNLV, where I could either record myself or record my voice over a couple of slides that share some background about each of those projects. And so that could be a way to have a visual component instead of the block of text, and that could make that a little bit more interactive. But I think that would be the most obvious one. I could probably do a short intro video for myself on the homepage as well. But I like the jump the pictures and see my cute pets, so I don't know.
Oh, I have a point. You have to get people to the site.
Yeah.
So links to your social media and on your business cards, wherever you can link the website, the social media platform that you have. The thing is you have to get people to actually go there. And that is critical, because you can have a website that's sitting up, that's being static, as it was mentioned earlier. And if people never find your website, then they never get the benefit of the information that you're sharing there. So links everywhere, constantly, links to how people can find your presence online.
Yeah, I put that on my business card right when I got here, even when I was still emerging. I put the, And people don't think about doing that, academics, but I absolutely.
Yeah, I just pulled up my Twitter real quick. It's just sort of a brief example, but I've got it linked on my Twitter bio. It's on my CV line at the top, and so you can have that as well. It's on my business card. And so I just try to make sure everything links to each other as well. So you can see, like, retweet other things, talk about, this was in UNLV Today this week where it talked about undergrad research and stuff, academic talks, but yeah, absolutely, drive people to the site, so anywhere you have an opportunity to put your website.
Yeah, and I always include, hashtag COE, the UNLV College of Education, I always hashtag UNLV, so sometimes it's being retweeted just within that community, right? So if I'm gonna bother to tweet, which we do on Wednesday and then Friday, I try to include that. It's really interesting. I think it's been rewarding, but again, I would say if you're going to be an academic, you need to be an open discussion about what it means to be overly engaged in the online presence, because I don't think we know. I mean, did your department talk about it, or?
Varying degrees.
Yeah.
I think some people are more engaged in it than others, and I think that's true of any department.
Yeah.
So.
So I think it's tricky, and I think it's new realm of how we communicate and talk to each other.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So from your experience, how long does it take you every day to keep up with these old social media presence? I mean, it sounded like it's another job. Like your niece is doing 8 hours every day for her social media, and it's like her main job.
Oh, yeah, but it's a paying job. I mean, she makes $50,000 a year doing that.
She just does that. For us,
Yeah.
like we do research, we're
Yeah.
now students, some of us have jobs, so how do we keep this social media presence? I mean, we have to have our own lives
Great
as well.
question.
Yeah.
So,
It's consistency. I think it goes back to, you don't necessarily have to post every day, but if you're gonna post twice a week, be very consistent
About
in
doing it.
posting twice a week.
And put it in your calendar as another appointment
Appointment
or
to do.
task,
Yeah.
right? And that way
Exactly.
you know that it's coming up and you can prepare for it.
Think about how those things connect to each other too, because I think for me with Twitter, I really enjoy getting to see, a friend of mine was on, it's the NPR station in Kansas City, so I just moved here from Kansas, and he was on their station talking about social media and politics, which, as you saw on my website, is one of the research areas I do, and so, in my Twitter feed, when I follow it and tailor it to my research. So on the one
Yeah.
hand, while yes, of course, I need to be doing research, being on Twitter and hitting retweet on a couple of things that post to my feed that are connected to my research, that causes me to think about my research, isn't all that totally different than thinking about research to go do writing, right? So how those things interconnect. But
Yeah.
certainly don't overspend your time.
Oh, yeah,
And-
it can be addictive.
Yeah.
It's-
There's a balance.
I
Yeah.
think-
addictive to me, and I
Yeah.
have to give up my personal Facebook account for research. So I'm now thinking of going back to social media, but I'm still thinking about like how I'm gonna manage my time between research, between my future job, and because I never imagined that my responsibilities are gonna be less in the future. They're gonna increase and
Right.
increase and
Yeah.
increase, and you need to keep that for forever.
See, I think my model's not a good model for people unless it becomes what you're researching and thinking about. Her model is initial starting of having a web page that looks professional, that links to the things you want to do, that also links to your person. I think has to be fundamentally the first step for whether you're going into business or an academic. You've got to have that basic platform, which doesn't take a lot. Once you've established it and set it up, it can remain kind of static in ways that mine can't anymore. It's taken a life of its own, right? And that's one of the reasons why I talked to enough people before I started. I have a social studies colleague who does this now once a week, right? Same kind of thing. He's at Mississippi State. But that's why it's why Wednesday. I know that Thursday afternoon I'm going to prep it, right? And then I'm going to post it. If I have somebody else doing it for me, I tell them I need it by Friday, right? I've got to have it by Friday because am I going to link to Amazon? Am I going to link to books? Having a book image, you wanted to be able to go get it or think about it or read other reviews. So sometimes I link to Amazon or Kirkus Review. So it takes me a while, even if it's all written, it takes me a while to prep it. And I've included that in my Vita, right? So in my Vita, I have curated X number of people every year, and I list that and put the link there. So my Vita is a hot mess, because not only does it have all the other things, I have a whole section that is editorial things I've curated on my blog, because I think it's academic, right? And I'm going to wait for the provost or somebody to tell me, see ya, it's not, right? But I think there's the argument to be made. But if you're starting where she is, I think it's essential that it looks like. If you're going to do something that's more interactive, you have to decide how much time you're going to commit to that, right?
Yeah, you get in PR and marketing, you do that for your career. You play on, I mean, you're on social media, you're creating things like that. I mean, that's what you do for a living. You actually get paid to create social media posts.
Any other questions? Maybe, what are
There's a
some?
question.
We got one?
Sorry, I just
Oh,
thought
go
of it.
ahead.
No, you're good, I'm sorry.
It's too late.
What do you all think is kind of the, I don't know if I wanna say easiest or most easiest, what do you think is the like easiest mistake to make in when you're kind of putting together a kind of online presence like this?
That is a good question. I've made so many, then they were all pretty easy. We're in a world where playing on the internet feels like it's the job of the amateur, and I don't think it's the job of the amateur. And I was clearly an amateur doing it, right? And I even felt like I talked to quite a few people who'd done it, who had presence, but I didn't go consult with a marketing person, or and maybe I should have. So I think what images you choose are stuck with you. You know, like right now, the image we have on the top is of the summit that's coming, right? But I'll change that during the year, and the image is of a bookshelf that was in my office, right, with a bunch of young adult literature. Was that the right image? Should I have been in the image? You know, so I think there's all kinds of things. But for a long time, it was just that shelf of young adult books where people could read the spine. You know, one of my daughters accused me of stealing one of her books. She says, "Is that copy of Harriet the Spy?" You know, so it's one of those things. So I think they can be thinking that it's the internet looks like the world of the amateur. It isn't. I think people are more and more doing everything they can to look like an amateur while they're being a professional.
I would say too, an easy mistake to make might be impulsively you write something and then you want to take it back and then you can't take it back. So think about, what you're going to post before you post it, and if you feel really strongly about it, maybe do the lowest
Lowest
That's right.
common denominator,
Yeah.
right? What would you want that person to do? So I think that's a mistake that a lot of people have made, and to them it was really easy to post this bad review or this picture, but it cost them their job, right? So I think reeling in the impulsivity of wanting to post whatever is on your mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say
Really
keep
good.
it simple.
Yeah.
Keep social media really, really simple, and even the things that you're writing, write for a sixth grader. Because if you write for a sixth grader, pretty much everyone's gone through the sixth grade. They teach you that in journalism. Is newspaper articles are written for sixth graders. Because most people have gone to the sixth grade, and people who are more advanced can always come down and understand something at a sixth grade level. And I think that's important with social media too, is that don't overdo it. Just keep whatever you're posting very simple and not a lot of words. Words just don't. Pictures though.
Yeah.
Pictures are great. Pictures and video are huge, and a picture says 1,000 words, right? We always talk about that. And as she had mentioned, don't push that send button unless you're willing to deal with the consequences of what you are sending out into the world.
Short paragraphs if you're going to write, Just like, think of writing for a newspaper. I think that's really good. It's like, when I wanted to post after Parkland, I called the two people that ended up editing the book with me and said, would you read this? Because I got to know if I sound too angry or too upset, or, I don't want to think of guns in schools that way anymore. But when it happened, I wanted to write about it. So I had both of them read it before I put it up, right? Which is better than just knee-jerk reacting. I've had my blog picked up by the National Council of English Teachers 3 or 4 times, but I've had posts retweeted maybe every other week or once a month by them, right? So they're more likely to reposition me through social media than they are to put me on their blog, right? Because they have people writing professionally for their blog, but occasionally they've emailed me and say, hey, can we repost this? But if it's on social media, they can repost it immediately. And so if they retweet something, anybody that's following the National Council of Teachers of English might see that tweet, right? So.
I guess one last thing I'd say is just, especially when you're new and you're a grad student, so if you haven't ever made a website, don't reinvent the wheel. So look at what people in your field are already doing, right? So if you have 2 or 3 people that you're regularly citing, maybe go see if they have a website, right? If that's somebody you aspire to be like, why not see what their presence is like? And this is another way of trying to, build off of that. And creating your digital presence is no different than sort of building a research presence similar to theirs. And certainly that's something I did was requesting and looking at, other grad students that I knew, but also established faculty in communication studies to say, okay, if I look at like 10 different websites, I'm a very social science person, I look at all these websites and I can decide what I want this to be. So.
Do we have any more questions or comments from anyone? No? Okay, well, thank you all for coming and
Oh, it's
Thank
been
you
fun.
all.
That resource looks so awesome.